It's time to talk Buffalo Bills football on the Our Football Network, the OFN today, as we continue to take a look back at the NFL draft. We're going to cover as many teams as we can. And anytime, of course, we get an opportunity to talk about the Buffalo Bills, we give a ring to Ryan Talbot from nyupstate.com. And Ryan, good to talk to you again.
Hey, good to talk to you too.
This isn't the fantasy season yet, but we'll be getting into that soon enough. So I know there's a lot of fans out there that are going to be interested in things that we could talk about. I know we're probably not going to talk again until the season begins. But fantasy-wise, the addition of James Cook, he would be the biggest new rookie that could actually cause some damage in the backfield. What'd you think about that specific pickup? Because it just seemed like it was such an obvious Buffalo Bills move. The way that their game is predicated, the passing game, and they obviously need running backs that can catch the ball in the backfield. That's exactly what Cook can do. That's what he did at Georgia. So what kind of playing time do you think he could get as a rookie?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, he fell right into Buffalo's laps in the draft. He's kind of a souped up version of what I think they were hoping to get when they tried to sign J.D. McKissic in free agency. He's someone that can catch the ball in the backfield. He's really good hands, reliable pass catcher. But I think he's a much better runner than McKissic is and can be. So I'm interested to see how the Bills utilize him here as a rookie. Now, if you're in those PPR leagues, I think that James Cook is a great addition because I think he is going to get quite a few receptions this year out of the backfield. I think the Bills are still going to lean on Devin Singletary as their number one back, at least early in the year. But if Cook can show that he can run the ball effectively and catch the ball effectively, he's going to cut into Singletary's time. So he's definitely someone to keep an eye on in the fantasy games. And then if you're talking dynasty mode too, we can eventually talk about Khalil Shakir as well.
Yeah, and matter of fact, Dynasty is really where it's more interesting for Cook because there's still an unknown with Singletary and the long-term outlook with the organization. So he needs this is really the season that he needs to prove whether or not he's going to be the man because now they really have a guy that can take over. Moss just for whatever reason just doesn't seem to be that guy, but there's new fresh blood in the backfield to compete with Singletary. So long-term dynasty outlook, Cook's not a bad gamble.
No, not at all. I saw him going pretty high. I did one dynasty draft already. He was the third running back off the board in that. So not too surprising. He obviously fell behind Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker III. But there are some expectations for him in that dynasty format. You mentioned it. Singletary's a free agent after this year. Zack Moss is still under his rookie contract. He still has, I think, 2 years left on his deal. But he's coming off of a poor season. Brandon Beane did give him a little bit of encouragement recently when he said, he was coming off of a serious ankle injury. He really couldn't pivot with his leg or cut with one of his legs last year, and he thinks that's going to come back for Moss. So maybe Moss will be a bigger factor than we expect. But you're right. Long term, it's James Cook who could have a big role here in this Buffalo Bills offense.
Yeah, and as a fantasy fan, you always want to pick up those skill position players when you have high-powered offenses like the Bills and quarterbacks like Allen. So that's a no-brainer. And I'm not surprised at all that he was the third running back chosen. So it made a lot of sense. What about Shakir? Now, if you take a look at the overall draft, Shakir is the only other skill position player that the team picked up. And, with Crowder there now in the slot, and we saw what happened to Davis at the end of the season, and we know what the deal is with Diggs. So is Shakir have a really good chance of getting an opportunity to be the number 4 guy as far as snaps and overall production from the wide receiver unit?
Yeah, I think there's a path there. Isaiah McKenzie is another player that's going to be, have a chance to get that role. But if you look at this Bills offense, you know what you're getting in Stephon Diggs, you know what you're getting in Gabriel Davis. And Jamison Crowder does have a good track record, but he also has a history of lower body injuries. So if you're looking for someone in Dynasty long-term and someone that could maybe make an impact as a rookie, I think Shakir's a sneaky good pick just because, again, Crowder's missed some time over the past few seasons. If he's out, you're going to be seeing maybe Shakir split those reps with Isaiah McKenzie. The Bills love this guy. They said that if they would have had their 4th-round pick, they would have used it on him. Luckily fell into the 5th round, and the Bills traded up about 20 spots to go and get him. So he's someone that they came away very impressed with during their time meeting with him during the draft process. And I think that as soon as 2023, he'll be the starting slot receiver for this team. And with how Cole Beasley was utilized for a few seasons here, that's a pretty good role to have in a passing offense when you have Josh Allen as your quarterback.
Absolutely. All right, now let's take a look at the rest of the draft, starting with the top guy, Elam, and not a surprise. I mean, most people pegged Buffalo to look at one of those corners, and they chose Elam. So do you know why there was a difference between taking Elam over, say, Booth, who was the other guy that people were thinking that the Bills might be interested in? And Elam is now going to battle for that starting spot in camp, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes down to Andrew Booth, I think it came down to the medicals with him. I think there was some red flags, unfortunately, that knocked him out of the 1st round. I think he's a very talented cornerback. The Bills had brought him in for a top 30 visit, so they did their homework on him. Elam, again, another guy that really impressed his coaching staff. He went into these meetings at the Combine, pulled out a notebook that showed all of the different, what he learned on a game-by-game basis about big plays that Florida gave up. What could they learn from that? His technique, what wide receivers were doing. He was someone that kind of just fits that Sean McDermott mold. The only thing that doesn't fit in terms of what Sean McDermott likes as a player is he likes sure tacklers, and Elam has some room to improve there. And he even noted that. He said he's working with his father, a former NFL safety, on getting better as a tackler, getting in there, making sure he can make those plays. If he can clean up that part of his game, he can be an impact player from year one. As a rookie, he'll be competing with Dane Jackson for that number 2 role. Now, it could be that the first few weeks of the season that both guys are out there starting, depending on the health of Tre'Davious White, coming off of a season-ending injury last year in the Thanksgiving game over the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, that could be a huge boost to that secondary. You figure with Hyde and Poyer that maybe they have a couple more years left at the prime of their careers. So if Elam can pick things up quickly, maybe by the end of this season, next season, if he's every bit the player that they envision, the Bills might have the best secondary in football if it all works out that way. But rookie is a rookie. You never know how it's going to work out. But the Bills already have 3 high-profile DBs in that secondary, and they're kind of just fit in, that 4th player. Obviously, I'm not just also talking about the nickel spot, but those prime 4 spots.
Right.
I mean, Elam, if he becomes that guy, that's going to be a scary defense for the Bills over the next several years, at least for the secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, this is smart drafting by the Bills as well. Obviously, a lot of people knew they needed a cornerback, but I like to look at the roster as it's currently built. And you look at Tre'Davious White. He is cashed in. He has a big contract. I think having an opposite player at cornerback 2 on a rookie deal for the next, hopefully, 5 years, if all goes well for the Bills, that's huge for them. It's just like last year. They had Deion Dawkins signed to a long-term deal, and then they were able to find Spencer Brown in the day 2 of the draft. And now he looks like he's going to be that bookend right tackle long-term, and you have him on a rookie deal. When you're giving away big money to players at one spot, if you can get someone on a rookie deal opposite them who you're confident in, that's huge for the roster building, especially when you have Josh Allen on the massive contract, Stephon Diggs. That's why, again, getting a guy like James Cook in round 2, it's good to have a running back as well on a rookie contract, because let's face it, in today's NFL, a lot of the times when a running back is done with that first contract, you kind of just get rid of them and you go back into the draft again, kind of recycle them.
Yeah.
You don't want to spend the money there. But yeah, it's smart use of their cap space, in my opinion. So that was another reason I really like the Elam pick, based on, like you said, those talented members that they have in the secondary.
All right. So also linebacker Tyrell Bernard. I'm a fan. Great tackler, productive player. Where he fits though, that's the trick. Based on his size and speed and so forth. But kind of fits in my mind almost even like a hybrid. So what do you think? Was he drafted for a specific purpose?
I don't think he was drafted for a specific purpose. I think he was the best player available on their board in round 3. You look at the height, you look at the weight, you look at the speed. He's kind of like a Matt Milano clone. He's actually faster than Matt Milano, and Matt Milano has been such an important contributor to this team. But again, Milano, he has a history with injuries. So maybe it's like you said, okay, he's high on our board. We have a linebacker that we already love in Milano, but he's missed some time in his career here. It would be nice to have someone that can play all over the field, play like his hair is on fire, make those tackles from sideline to sideline. But I wouldn't be shocked if he was utilized as a big nickel of sorts. People forget that Milano was actually a safety at Boston College. When the Bills drafted him, they kind of converted him along to that linebacker position. You can kind of work both ways here with Bernard in terms of how you utilize him. When the Bills run the 3 linebacker sets, A.J. Klein was let go for cap purposes. Maybe he ends up being linebacker number 3 in those base sets when they are playing in a 4-3. Again, the tackling ability is there. I know some fans, I think if there was a pick that fans weren't as high on, it was Bernard, just because they thought, well, linebacker in round 3 when you already have Edmonds, when you already have Milano. I get it. And with Edmonds, his deal coming up, I think a lot of people thought if they were going to take a linebacker, it'd be someone more in the mold of someone who could be the heir apparent to Edmonds, which Bernard certainly is not, based on his stature, based on his skill set.
Well, like you said, though, it's important when, and sometimes fans will overlook this, and coaches don't, like you mentioned, the injuries, because you have to always look at that. And if one guy, especially if Milano goes down, there's a big hole, and there's nobody else really to fill that hole that has the talent or upside like Bernard does.
Yeah, that's just it. Last year or the last few years, it was A.J. Klein, and there were things that Klein did well. He was pretty good at getting after the quarterback. He was an occasional blitzer. He was very good at stopping the run. He was not so good in coverage, though, and you need someone that can cover in today's NFL at that linebacker position. That's what Bernard can do. He can blitz, though, just like A.J. Klein can. He's a sure tackler. He checks a lot of the boxes of what Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane like in their prospects.
All right, now the other player that they picked, as we start to get a little bit later on, that was intriguing, and it always is intriguing when a team goes with a kicker in the draft. Well, the last time it worked out, which happened in actually the same round a couple of years ago with Tyler Bass. So Matt Araiza is just a freaky talented player. There's just no question about that. So when you draft a kicker, the chances are pretty high that the team is going to do everything in their power to make him the starter. There isn't, all right, we're going to move him along. He's going to be a back. There ain't no backups. It's just you are the guy. So he has the ability. And what do they like about him the most?
The big leg. Matt Hawk, the only reason he lasted on that roster last year is he was a reliable holder for Tyler Bass. The punting was very inconsistent. He had a lot of punts that went off the side of his leg. He had a huge punt that was blocked just week 1 of last year against Pittsburgh that pretty much sealed that game. He seemed to hold the ball on his punts like an extra half second longer than what you saw. There was a lot that did not go right for him. And I just don't see a scenario where he can come in and compete against Matt Araiza here and expect to win this job. Like you said, they brought him in. He has that freaky leg strength, 80-yard punts, 70-yard punts, 60-yard punts, almost on a semi-regular basis. And the knock on, quote-unquote, the punt god, as he's called, is the hang time on his kicks. I would argue that hang time's not as important in Buffalo when you're dealing with the swirling winds. You want someone that has the big leg that can kick through them. And when you get to Buffalo in even November, those winds can be pretty tricky. So I'd rather take a chance on the guy with the big leg. He's been working with Nick Novak throughout the draft process, probably before that as well. So he's someone that's already working on his holding game. That's the only scenario where he could possibly not make this roster. But I still don't. I'm talking like 99.9% chance he's the Bills punter this year. You almost have to. It would have to be just a catastrophe for him not to be there.
And if you could, and if the organization could swing that, and he becomes a reliable punter the way Bass has been a reliable kicker, it's such a big deal. because you just don't have to worry, and you can always afford these guys. So it's just such a relief, and you don't have to worry about your kicker, your holder, your punter for maybe 7, 8 years if you want to go ahead and pay those guys. So it's not easy to find reliable kickers and punters within a 2-year span, and hopefully the Bills have done that.
Yeah, and the running joke on social media was it was a surprise the Bills took him because do they really need a punter when they're not going to punt in 2 games against the Patriots? So, that was the running joke. Oh, you're only going to get this guy for about 15 games a season,
Yeah.
but I'm sure he'll get his money's worth during this year and throughout his career.
Okay, now what about the final 3 players that were drafted? Benford, the FCS corner. You got the tackle from Virginia Tech and the linebacker from Clemson. What do they like about those guys specifically?
Yeah, Benford's interesting because after they drafted him, they talked about his ability to play both cornerback and safety.
Okay.
They said they're going to try him at cornerback first. But we've seen that happen with, they actually mentioned Micah Hyde started out as a cornerback in his career and then moved over to safety. They had that themselves before the Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane era with A.J. Williams. When they had him from Texas, he started as a corner, moved over to safety at one point in his career. So that they like what he brings in terms of the intangibles. They like the way that he played in terms of the passes defense, getting up there and how well he played. But he did play at Villanova. It was a smaller program. But to the Bills' credit, they've had some hits on the players from smaller school. Weber State, Taron Johnson, and Saran Neal's been on this roster, another small school guy. And they've hung around. So Benford is not a lot to make this roster, but I still think there is a scenario where he grabs that last cornerback job. He'll be going against the likes of Cam Lewis, a former undrafted free agent out of UB, local product that's been here for a few seasons, and some other back of the end roster guys. So I see a path there. For the last, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, well, all you have to do is take a look at the Ourlads depth chart for the Bills, and you can see that almost every defensive back, with the exception of Elam, who just got chosen, and the 2 star safeties, and of course, White was also a first round. Without those 4 guys that we just talked about that could give you an elite 4, everyone else, every other DB are 4th round, 5th round, 6th round, college free agent, that kind of stuff. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Nick McLeod, Elijah Griffin, both undrafted free agents from last year. They have Griffin has a year in the system. McLeod was actually claimed at one point early in the year by the Cincinnati Bengals, and he was on their 53-man roster, but they were able to sign him back. So undrafted guys, though, that at least have a year under their belts, they'll probably have more knowledge of the playbook that gives them a chance to claim that final spot. But I like Benford's path. The last 2 picks, much harder. I think that you're looking most likely at practice squad guys.
Okay.
Just based on, Luke Tenuta. Big. He reminds me a lot athletically of what they liked last year in Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle. That seems to be their MO, is finding these giants that show some athleticism. But where does he fit on this roster? Doyle, I think, is like up for one of the final spots as for this offensive line as is going into this year. I'm not sure you can have another project type player on that 53-man roster. I think David Questenberry is going to be your swing tackle. That puts Doyle at your tackle number 4. And that makes Tenuta kind of that guy on the outside looking in most likely, in my opinion. But I think that there's a chance you can sneak him onto the practice squad. Balen Spector, maybe if he can prove himself as a special teams contributor, this training camp preseason, maybe he can claim one of those final spots. Because when you do look at the depth of the linebacker position on this team, there's guys like Andre Smith that don't play a lot on defense. They're pretty much a core special teams player.
Okay.
Obviously, Tyler Matakevich is a great special teams player, but again, that's where he earns his roster spot. So Spector can come in here and prove himself quickly as a special teams contributor. That's his path to the roster. But again, he might be a priority addition to the practice squad once cuts are made if he does not make that initial 53.
Speaking of practice squad players and maybe even rookies that were signed last year after the draft, and you talked about a couple of them, overall on the team, can you give us a name or two that most people outside Buffalo with pretty much no idea who these guys are. And especially when you look at the depth charts and you don't see all you see are the numbers, then this guy's you're probably not even going to make the team. College free agent 21, college free agent 20. All right, those guys, man, I don't even know who that is. Can you give me a player or two on either side of the ball that did show something last year, whether it's practice squad or maybe limited game action, that the Bills feel might be able to make a difference this season?
Boy, that's a tough one. One player that caught my eye last year, and he didn't make the main roster. He did hang around though on the practice squad. Was Josh Thomas. The problem for Josh Thomas is he's a safety. You already mentioned the fact that they have Hyde and Poyer, one of, if not the best duo in the league. Then they already have Jaquan Johnson. They drafted Damar Hamlin last year. It was an uphill battle for him, but I thought he was great in training camp in the preseason. So he's someone I'm going to keep my eye on.
Okay.
Maybe he'll be a surprise contributor to that main roster. From last year's UDFAs, I still did like Nick McLeod's skill set. He had some speed to his game as well. That's something the Bills were trying to add a little bit of to their outside cornerback position. He has some experience on the 53-man roster based on his stint with the Bengals. So I'm interested to see what he does in year two. And then, obviously not guys that were on the roster last year. I thought they brought in some UDFAs this year that have a chance to kind of come in and prove themselves and say, maybe I'll make the roster this year, or maybe I'll be that guy that in year two, after a year on the practice squad, I'm going to come in and compete for a roster spot.
Yeah, the guys that stick out the most, Alec Anderson, he had a draftable grade. Definitely a developmental prospect. He's got to get bigger in the weight room. So you stash him maybe on the practice squad, you build him up. Blackshear is interesting because, I know Blackshear because I'm a Rutgers guy, and I remember he was an electrifying kid there, went to Virginia Tech. So I know, and he's a typical Bills running back prospect based on his athleticism, receiving ability, and so forth. And then Jalen Windemeyer. Now, the talent is there. It's really through the roof, the talent. He's got so much of it, but he's also extremely inconsistent. Everything's, between the years, basically, with him. But to not have to worry about drafting that kind of a player, that was nice. So maybe even a Weidermeyer is somebody to keep an eye on if he can get a little bit more consistent, as I mentioned, and coached up. So those are the three guys that I kind of zeroed in on, and I don't know whether or not you agree or if you have any other players that we should be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, Weidermeyer was number one for me. You look at this team, obviously they have Dawson Knox and O.J. Howard. Both guys very talented. Both guys free agents, so at the end of the season. I think Knox is part of their long-term plans. I wouldn't be surprised if there's an extension for him, whether it's before the start of the season or even in season. But then tight end 3, you have Tommy Sweeney, who he's had his moments, but he's not someone that's a roster lock by any stretch of the imagination. There's Quentin Morris, who was a UDFA last year. Probably someone I could have mentioned in that conversation a topic or two ago.
Oh, that's the kid from Bowling Green?
Yes, and he was elevated to the main roster from the practice squad for 1 or 2 games and suited up. So he's someone that's in play there. But I like Weidermeyer's skill set. I like that he was very productive. He tested extremely poorly. That was big against him. But the Bills brought him in for a top 30 visit. And they seem to like him and like what he must have said in those interviews when they looked at film, stuff like that. Alec Anderson, what's really interesting about him is his uncle is on the coaching staff here. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, okay.
His uncle is the assistant special teams coordinator, Corey Harkey, another UCLA guy that he played at UCLA in his career. So a little bit of a relationship there. I think that he was a priority free agent for a lot of teams. And I think having that relationship, having his uncle already here in Buffalo, might have helped the Bills kind of convince him to come on. We do have some open spots on this offensive line in terms of you could compete for an end of the roster spot against a Greg Mance or against a Cody Ford, a former second round pick, but a guy who's far from a lock. And you can go up and down the line in terms of could they like to keep a certain set number. It doesn't have to just be a tackle or a guard or a center, this, that, or the other. But I think that they like that skill set and they want to see what he can do here. And there's a true opportunity. And then Blackshear met with Kelly Skipper during the pre-draft process. Skipper really tested him. Blackshear talked about that before the draft even took place, how he really liked that meeting with him. And, we've already mentioned Singletary, free agent at the end of the year. Zack Moss, he still has a few years left, but if he doesn't show something in training camp this year, his roster spot's not even safe this year.
Absolutely.
Duke Johnson, I think he's on the, right now it's going to be Duke or Zack Moss based on who makes this team, because when you bring in a James Cook, he's obviously a lock. Singletary's a lock. Do they still want to have a fullback in Reggie Gilliam? Most likely. So Tywan Jones is a special teams guy, but he's going to most likely make this roster too. There's only so many backs you can carry. So Blackshear might get that quote-unquote redshirt season on the practice squad, but then become a factor in year 2 in the backfield itself.
Okay, a couple more things before I let you go. What's left? Are there any holes or any concerns that you think the Bills are going to be looking at to add on prior to the season?
No real holes in my opinion. I think if anything, they're going to try to get something worked out with Jordan Poyer. Maybe though that will free up some more space for this year in the event of an injury at training camp, this, that, or the other. Poyer wants a new deal. He switched agents to Drew Rosenhaus, so he's very serious about it. And I think the Bills do want to do right by him. The dollars just have to make sense, because we've talked about it. They've already committed a lot of money to a lot of players. But Poyer has been such a key player for that defense in the back end. I think that's their number one priority, not necessarily bringing anyone in. Could they bring in a veteran cornerback to just kind of compete for a roster spot? Yes. There was a lot of talk pre-draft about James Bradbury. One, he's going to still cost too much money. He's going to want a starting role. I don't think there's a path to a starting role here in Buffalo. But maybe it is a Joe Hayden. The longer he sits out there, you can say, listen, we like your skill set. We like your game. We want you in here to mentor some of these players along with Trey White. And there's other vets, too, that maybe they've lost a step. But the Bills have always had almost a history of bringing those players in to either compete for a spot or to mentor young guys. Josh Norman for a few years, obviously. Kevin Johnson was here for a little bit. So they do like to bring in vets and add them into the mix.
All right. And as far as the storyline heading into training camp, because we'll talk at some point, probably I would think between training camp and the preseason to preview the upcoming season. But up until then, is there would Ken Dorsey, is that going to be like one of the headlines to see, the change at coordinator, or is there another storyline or two that we need to keep an eye on?
Ken Dorsey makes a lot of sense. How is his offense, I should say, going to be different? Is he going to utilize more 2 tight end sets? Is he going to make, utilizing the running back a little bit more important? Not necessarily in carries. Again, it could be James Cook getting 4 to 5 touches as a receiver per game. It could be lining him up in certain ways. So that's a big storyline. Obviously, I think the offensive line is a big storyline. They bring back Aaron Cromer, someone that was a coach here previously. He has a really good track record of developing guys. They have some young players on their roster. I think this is Cody Ford's last chance. I'm interested to see how those two kind of mesh together. And then in terms of players, obviously all eyes will be on Von Miller this summer as the newest member of the Bills. And the overall storyline is Super Bowl or bust, because that is the expectation.
All right, Ryan. Well, we appreciate it as always. I'm sure you're real busy. It's going to be a lot of fun, especially when you're covering a team, like you just said, that has Super Bowl or bust as a potential slogan. And it doesn't get any better than that, covering a football team that you might actually not only be covering the Super Bowl, but you'll be covering the team that you cover during the season that could be there. So we look forward to talking again before the season begins, and I look forward to talking to you several times before the season begins when we set up our dynasty draft in a couple of weeks, and we have some changes. I'm going to be the new commish, so Kevin Knight's going to give me some pointers on our dynasty league, how to operate the sleeper app. And once I do that, I mean I'm a mad scientist, so I'm going to do all sorts of cool stuff. So we're going to have even a funner year this year, no question about it. So I can't wait to talk fantasy football with you soon.
Hey, I can't wait either.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate your time. We'll talk to you again before the season begins.
Hey, sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you.
See ya.